I like to ask a question if we can take things from a section by section,
Mm.
the way you answer the questions. When it comes to preparing for the quant and the verbal section, what your strategies are test prep wise.
Sure. So let's start with quant. And what I always start out with when I'm first working with a student who is maybe, let's say, like 20 years out of undergrad. I've seen it. Like I've seen people in their mid to late 40s who want to go back to grad school, and they come to me and they say, I haven't touched math for 20 years. What do I do? And I always tell them, well, here's the good news. As far away as it was, even if it was 10, 20 years ago, you have learned it before. And there's nothing new that you have to learn for this test. So, content wise, the GRE covers arithmetic, algebra, geometry, and data analysis. That's it. There's no trigonometry, there's no pre-calculus, there's no algebra 2 or anything like that. So, compared to, for instance, the SAT, there's much, much less content that you're responsible for knowing. It's more about relearning those rules and those strategies. The other important thing to remember is that, above all, the GRE is a test of your reasoning ability. That's what they're seeking to measure. Think about this from the perspective of an MBA program. Do you think like an MBA program just wants to admit people who are very good at algebra? Like, that's not the skill that they're looking for. They don't want to know how many interesting algebra rules you know. For that reason, many of the math questions can be solved using, and I won't say common sense, but sort of a more reasoned based method. And that could be something as simple as like benchmarking. So saying, oh, if they told me that the number of boys in this class is twice the number of girls, I know that the number of boys must be even. And right there, that gets rid of all the odd answer options. And I know that's, sort of like tricky and hacky, but that's the type of reasoning, quantitative reasoning, that the test is looking for. So that's on the quantitative side. On the verbal side, again, I'll sort of frame it in that way. Like, they're not looking for people who are walking dictionaries, right? It's not like they just want people who have extensive vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
So for those vocab questions, to start, I'll talk about reading in a second, but for
Mm-hmm.
vocabulary, what they're testing is your ability to operate in an environment with incomplete information. And I'll kind of explain what I mean by that. If you have a sentence with a blank in it, without looking at the answer options, you can make a pretty good guess about what kind of word should go in that blank. And if you can eliminate all the words that you do know, and maybe you're down to 2, and one of those words has like a negative prefix, but you're looking for a positive word,
Mm-hmm.
you know that the remaining word has to be correct. The little secret that I tell regardless of their starting level of vocab, is everybody will see words that they don't know. That is going to happen. That's what the test wants. The test is not interested to see how many words you know. It wants to see how you behave in a situation where you don't know words. What context clues do you use to eliminate wrong answers? And then very quickly, the reading part of it. This is something that stresses a lot of people out. You get passages on the GRE that are about, particle physics, or, some Renaissance poet that you couldn't care less about. And you're not expected to be a subject matter expert in those things. The reason the GRE chooses those topics is because it knows that those topics are boring and very few people know about them. So what the reading section is looking to evaluate is, are you able to look at how the author is making the argument? Not the content, not, like, do you understand this chemical process or something like that? But do you recognize that the author is questioning a previous hypothesis? That's the sort of reasoning that the test is looking to measure.
This video is sponsored by the Funding Masterclass for International Students by Sojourning Scholar. Are you dreaming about earning a US education but worried about the cost? What if I told you it's possible to get your degree debt-free? As someone who's been in your shoes, I secured over $300,000 in free funding for my education. Now, I've created the Funding Masterclass to help you do the exact same. In this step-by-step program, you will learn how to access scholarships, grants, assistantships, and more tailored specifically for international students. With access to our funding library and several pre-built templates and an exclusive private community for support, you will have everything you need to secure the funds to study in the US debt-free. So take the next step in your journey of studying abroad by heading to sojourningscholar.com/FMC and join us today. I'll see you inside the program. And now let's get back to the podcast. I see. I'd like to go back to the quant section for a little bit. When you work with students who are, let's say, 5+ years removed from the academic environment, these are people who have been working as professionals and they want to go back to school. To those students, I think their strategy possibly would include revising their knowledge of, like the basics of arithmetic, because some things you probably haven't used in several years. But there's also a component of your prep that needs to be understanding that nuance of the GRE and mastering strategy. Percentage-wise, how do you prefer students to allocate time towards content knowledge development versus GRE strategy mastery?
That's a great question. And I'll give you an exact answer, a rough answer. So content-wise to strategy, I would probably say about 70-30, if not 65-35.
Okay.
So there certainly are formulas that you need to know, right? Like you have to know the Pythagorean theorem. There's no tricky way to get around that. But going back to what I was saying, like what this test is really about is not as much content knowledge. And there are so many ways around difficult algebra if you just know where to look. So yeah, I would probably say 70-30 or maybe 65-35 in favor of content to sort of like strategy tips and tricks.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's for the quant section. For the verbal reasoning section, a very common approach out there for prepping seems to be just memorizing hundreds, if not thousands of words. Where's your stance when it comes to those kind of test preppers?
So I always like to say this. Let's say that you get, Joe Schmo's 500 most important words for the GRE and you memorize it, cold. The likelihood that any one of those words is going to appear on the test is very, very low. And the likelihood that there will be words that you don't know that aren't in that list is very, very high. Because, and I don't know this for a fact, but I have to imagine that maybe behind the scenes, ETS keeps an eye on what those word lists are and makes sure to include words that are not in it. So as far as a strategy of like, I'm going to become an expert at these 200, 300, 400, 500 words, and that's all I'm going to do, not the best. My philosophy is sort of quantity over quality. Okay. So expose yourself to as many words as you can, but don't worry so much about having them down cold. Because when it comes down to it, sometimes just having like a good sense of like the lean of a word, like, okay, this is a positive word, this is a negative word. Oftentimes that's plenty, right? Okay. That's all you need to do. I would also say the most efficient way to study a lot of words is to learn word roots. So common prefixes, suffixes, and roots. So, and like CHRON, cron, right? It's like time. So any time, chronology, right? Anytime that that root comes up in a word, you have a pretty good sense of what that word's talking about. It has something to do with time.